أهلا بكم في هذه المقابلة الخاصة مع اللورد طارق أحمد وزير الدولة لشؤون الشرق الأوسط وشمال إفريقيا. Thank you for this interview.
It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Thank you. Pleasure is mine. More than 10,000 civilians, Palestinians are killed in Gaza so far, and the number is rising. When will the UK call for a ceasefire?
Well, first and foremost, I think every life lost, irrespective, if we go back to the events of the 7th of October and subsequent events thereafter, every life matters. I said that at the UN General Assembly. Israeli or Palestinian, whether it's an Arab or Jewish life, whether it's a Christian, Muslim or a Jew, every life matters. And if I may, the person on faith say, to every life lost, inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. But the important question you ask is about a ceasefire. Of course, I understand the sentiments, but if we unpack that, it's important to also understand what a ceasefire constitutes. One, it's got to be agreed by both sides. And it's important that ultimately every conflict ends with that conflict coming to an end. And that is why our focus has been right now on what are the key priorities for Gaza. We totally understand the calls that are being made, but the reality also has to be understood that there needs to be two sides to the conflict need to agree to this. There also needs to be that brokerage of that cessation of hostilities. And that's probably the area we're in, where we've seen different countries playing very key roles in this respect, and I acknowledge the efforts of the likes of, for example, Egypt, particularly on the humanitarian front, but also I acknowledge fully the role Qatar is playing in this important role in ensuring that the key messages are understood by both sides. And that's why where we have got to about creating these spaces where we can get the kind of humanitarian support needed, and also imploring, as I did in my recent visit to Israel, for a real recognition and understanding, as the Israelis have said themselves, of applying and abiding by the whole concept of international humanitarian law and what that means.
Yeah, so just so that I understand, the UK has not and is not working on ceasefire. You don't want to?
No, on the contrary. What have I said? We understand that, but there has to be a process towards understanding.
Western officials...
If I may, I think this has been a lot, and it's the Americans. I know Tony Blinken was in the region recently as well. What do we need right now? We need the space to be able to allow for these negotiations to take place, because a negotiation for any eventual ceasefire means that both sides are involved to it, and we have to create that space, and that needs confidence building measures. It needs that importance of humanitarian aid and support going into Gaza for those who are suffering, and that's where our primary focus has been. We want to see an end to this conflict. If I could, on a personal note, I'd like to see it end tomorrow, but we've got to create the conditions that allow us. Both sides have to agree to this concept of a ceasefire, and we're not in that place right now.
Yes, but the West, and we have heard many Western officials, British officials saying a ceasefire will empower Hamas. So there must be, you want to see ceasefire, but at the end, also at the same time, you want to give Israel time to just eliminate Hamas.
Well, first of all,
how long is this time? How many civilians?
Look. I think that's totally the wrong question. Every civilian life matters. And I've said that to you right at the start. First of all, let's unpack your question on Hamas. Hamas is not someone that we prescribe to. We've prescribed them as a terrorist group. I speak, if I may, for my faith as a Muslim. Where does it sanction the taking of innocent life, as was done by Hamas? Absolutely outrageous action. And we need to condemn these unequivocally. And that's why I praise also many people across the region, and let's also acknowledge the Palestinian Authority in that respect, who not only distanced themselves but condemned these actions. Hamas is not a partner for peace in any shape or form. And what we have seen is, and they continue even today to have a capacity, but what we're imploring upon Israel at the same time is the protection of civilian life. A young woman or a young baby or a young child in Gaza is not a Hamas affiliate, and that's the point we're making very strongly to the Israeli government about the need to protect civilian lives, and that's where our focus is.
You called for a humanitarian ceasefire, right? You just came from the region.
Yes, I just came. My visit recently, I went to Ramallah. I met with the Palestinian leadership. I met with the Prime Minister, the Foreign Minister, and other members of their committee about the need to work to the immediate, what's needed right now. Why have we cause for this space? To ensure that the people in Gaza, the people, the civilians in Gaza, the ordinary Palestinians in Gaza are suffering. And what we can do to understand, one, empowering the Palestinian Authority. They are the people that we deal with when it comes to the issues of the Palestinians. That's why the United Kingdom's also articulated the importance of not just empowering the PA now, that this tragedy, the events of whether we look at those abhorrent events of the 7th of October, when we look at what's the subsequent tragic lives that are being lost every day in Gaza, these have to count for something. Every life matters. And the biggest legacy and testament we can give to that is ensure that this has to be the here and now, that this window we now have, where the world is seized on the plight of the Palestinians, that we don't look at Gaza separately or look at the West Bank separately. We actually put it together and work towards that. But I totally appreciate the point that to do so, we need those fundamental confidence building measures to ensure that we can build towards that.
Okay, why didn't the Israelis listen to you and just do some short ceasefire for humanitarian causes?
Again, we're talking to the Israelis.
What are they
regularly.
saying?
No, and they recognize the importance of supporting Palestinian civilians. That's why we have seen some movement on, for example, it's not open right now as we speak, some opening of the Rafah crossing to allow aid in. And if you go back to that time, you know, you had the UN Secretary General, you had President Biden, including our Prime Minister, imploring upon the Israeli side to open up that crossing. And there were just a handful of trucks that went in. More recently, we've seen that trickle go to a flow to about 100 or so, but that's not enough. We need far more. But what we are seeing is small diplomatic wins are effective. The fact that I was in the region, more recently, of course, the Secretary of State has been in the region. My Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, the UK Foreign Secretary are totally engaged. When Rishi Sunak went to Egypt, you were talking about my visit, he met with two key people. One was President Sisi, both to thank him and recognizing the important role that Egypt are playing currently and will play, especially in the situation in Gaza. But the other person he met as a bilateral was President Abbas of the Palestinian Authority. Why? Because we recognize the importance that it's not the Palestinians are periphery, they're central to this, and we need to be engaging at the highest level.
So just many points here, but let me go back to the UK position. Do you talk to Muslim people and people from the region? Do you know UK's image now among these people with the extreme stand that they've taken on the side of Israel? I mean, we understand on day one with the casualties gone from the Israeli side, but now it's been a month and there have been 10,000 civilians killed. So there are a lot of frustrations with the UK.
Of course.
You're aware of the image of Britain in the Arab and the Muslim world?
Of course. And you know, it's about doing one thing ultimately, and I've said it very recently. When I was in, let's take my recent visit, am I talking to people in the region? Of course I am. I told you I met with leaders across the Palestinian Authority. I also met with leaders of faith communities as well. And that was important. I went to Jerusalem. I went with the Christian leaders there, Archbishop Hassan, the leader of the Anglican. He's a close personal friend of mine. Of course we are talking to those in the region. I'm Muslim myself. I talk to Muslims every day, not just my family. There are a lot of people.
But the problem is that the UK has lost its stand as an unbiased.
Well, you say that. One thing I'm hearing very clearly, let's take the issue of the vote at the General Assembly, or our position we've taken at the UN in Malta. We've had a very nuanced position because we recognise there has to be a pathway. We need to create those spaces. And the UK hasn't sought to veto these things. What we've done is we're engaging quite directly, and what I'm hearing, certainly through diplomatic channels, is that the voice of the United Kingdom in terms of our diplomatic presence is not just needed, is very welcome. And that's why you've seen, as I said, it's not just Lord Ahmed, Tariq Ahmed going out there. This is about not just about symbolism, it's practical conversation. I'm not going to go into the detail we're having with each of our partners, but what I recognize is that our presence there is an important one. We have strong relationships with many Middle Eastern countries. So you can be brokers
of peace?
Well, we hope that we can be an important bridge. The United Kingdom's played that role. We are playing a role right now. I can't go into the details of everything we're doing, and you'll understand that, as I'm sure your viewers will. But as I said, we recognize that we have influence. We are partners, we are friends to Israel, but we are also partners and friends to the Arab world, to neighboring countries. We have a very strong relationship with Jordan. We have a very strong relationship with Egypt. These two countries have peace agreements with Israel. We have the Abraham Accord countries. So whilst this is a very, very dark cloud, and I fully accept that, every loss of life is a tragedy as it unfolds. We also need to look at that silver lining. Is there a possibility of really getting something which is lasting and sustainable out of that? And you know, you asked me about the Muslim world. I'm a Muslim by faith. I believe in justice, I believe in equality, and I also believe in hope. And I believe that we are put in, as I said to you just before we came on camera, in particular roles at a particular time. And of course, I ask myself this question every day: what more can I be doing, Tariq? What more can I be doing in ensuring that I'm doing my utmost? And I assure you, that's exactly what I'm focused on.
So the fear of spillover, like only recently 3 kids have been killed in Lebanon because of Israeli missile on their car in South Lebanon. Are there any assurances that there will not be a regional escalation? Are you getting any signals from Israel, Iran and its proxies?
Well, first and foremost, the short answer to your question is we've implored upon Israel about we don't want any new frontiers open up. We don't want the contagion of what's happening, the tragic situation in Gaza. No, they don't want it either. Why would you want, who would gain from this? Israel would not. Why would you want turmoil on all your borders? And that's why, just before we go on to Lebanon, let's even look at the occupied Palestinian territories. That's why we've implored Israel to reel back the movement we've seen from the settlers. They should not see this as a green light on what's happening in Gaza for them to continue with illegal settlements. And that's a point we're making quite directly to the Israelis. But on the broader point, it also means that key partners, and that's why we've seen the extent of diplomacy, not just from the UK, but from our key partners, and most recently again by the United States, because it matters. You know, what happens in the Middle East does not stay in the Middle East. This issue is something, again, before we came on camera, I said, it's something that I've followed since childhood. It's something I studied, I looked at, and it matters to people. It matters if you're Christian, if you're Jewish, if you're Muslim. It matters to people around the world.
Okay.
And I recognize that totally.
And just so that I understand, there was a first call between Foreign Minister James Cleverly and his counterpart, Iranian counterpart. It was the first in years, in a couple of years. What are the Iranians telling you?
Well, I think one of the things, again, I'm not going to go into details of the call. I think it's important. You've asked me about that, and that call happened. We have also, it's no secret of the challenges we felt Iran has caused, not just to instability in the region, but wider field. Many people are not, and wrongly, not talking about Russia's war on Ukraine. We've seen Iran providing drones there. We've also seen Iran's direct influence on key groups. If we go back in recent years, we've seen how certain groups such as the Houthis in Yemen have been supported by Iran. And therefore the messaging to Iran is very clear as well. It's in no one's interest, including Iran's, to see this conflict spreading. And it's important that at a time of important and real fragility in the region, that the UK Foreign Secretary had that conversation with the Iranian Foreign Minister.
Okay, just on political solution. You mentioned the settlers. We know your stand on Hamas. It's clear the UK government stands. Not once we hear a criticism of Netanyahu's policies and extreme right-wing policies that got us here, that got Hamas here, that got the Palestinians here. Will there be any review of these policies later on? Will someone from the West, the UK, advise Netanyahu that these policies got us here?
Well, I think, first of all, I challenge you on that you've not heard anything. We've been consistent. You know, settlements are illegal and they're an impediment to peace. That's not a new line from the British government.
Yeah,
this
but
is
no
a consistent.
criticism of Netanyahu and no criticism of this Israeli government.
And I think we're seeing right now, first of all, the current government which has been formed is not the same government. I mean, the statements we saw from extreme voices within the previous government prior to the conflict starting, we've seen other people now join. You know, to sum it all up, and I think that's a real sentiment on all sides, we've got to marginalize these extremist voices, but to be able to marginalize effectively, there has to be that hope for a better vision on both sides as well. It's no good just saying, let's think about Hamas for a moment, because, you know, comparisons are made to organizations like Daesh. You know, the ideology, this perverse hijacking of a noble religion that is Islam by these organizations is fundamentally wrong. Let's look at the principles of Judaism as well. The kind of lack of recognition of and others' right because they happen to be from a different community or from a different faith is also wrong. So we need the voices, but also those voices to be empowered. And I totally agree with you that what's happening in the West Bank, and that's why I proactively mentioned it, that we're already telling the Israeli government quite directly, this is not a green light for settler activity. The settlers and what they're doing is an impediment to the peace in the West Bank. And I also, this was a point that came up during my visit to Ramallah, and I commend again also the Palestinian Authority who've been acting to ensure that they themselves contain their own communities.
And here my last question,
of course.
What's left of the Palestinian Authority? Isn't it too late to take any step and rescue the image of Abu Mazen, considering all that's happened over the last years?
Well, what I'd say to you is, first of all, you should never give up hope. This is the first thing. The Palestinians do have representatives that we recognize and many recognize across the world as those who represent the Palestinians now. We're speaking to a broad range of Palestinian voices. But at a time of crisis, what's really needed is to ensure that those who are currently empowered also recognize, yes, there needs
did the West empower Abu Mazen and the Palestinian Authority over the past years?
We've continued to support the Palestinian authorities, but they should also, this is not the time to unpack that, but I totally recognize the issues of the lack of elections, the lack of representation, the need to address issues of procurement, issues of how the Palestinian Authority itself governs, issues that have plagued it at times as well. Those need to be addressed, and that should be part and parcel of this package. And I go back to what I said at the start. Let's not look at this issue as an isolated issue. Let's not look at a kind of Gaza first policy or then look at the West Bank afterwards, or not look at a full solution. We need to ensure that this tragedy which is unfolding in the Middle East is not again just consigned to history. This is an opportunity for you as a reporting journalist, for me as a serving minister in the British government, and for all others who carry responsibility to come up collectively. You're right to challenge me, and you will continue to do so. And I respect that. Why? Because those are exactly the kind of values you play to, that I represent a country today with the faith I am, the cultural background I have. And maybe despite all the challenges, and do I get criticisms and challenges by the Muslim community? You bet I do. But I also know, you know what? In my core, every day when I bow down in front of God, that I'm asking for sincere help. And I'm saying that let my words, let my actions result in something. And I hope, inshallah, they will.
Thank you so much. كنتم في مقابلة خاصة مع اللورد طارق أحمد، وهو وزير الدولة لشؤون الشرق الأوسط وشمال إفريقيا. شكرا للمتابعة.
لمتابعة المزيد من الأخبار والبرامج والقصص الإنسانية والوثائقيات والتقارير، لا تنسوا الاشتراك بقناتنا على يوتيوب، الضغط على زر الإعجاب وتفعيل جرس التنبيهات.